Sarah Whitmore's hands trembled as she signed away her future to a man she'd never met. The ink wasn't even dry when Martha Brennan's carriage pulled away, leaving her standing in knee-deep snow with nothing but a small trunk and a terrible choice already made. Somewhere in these frozen Montana mountains, a broken legend waited. Caleb Brennan, the mountain man destroyed by a grizzly's claws, now living like a ghost in the wilderness. Tomorrow, she would become his wife. Not for love, not even for hope, but because her mother was dying, her brother was starving, and desperate people don't get the luxury of romance. This is the story of two people who had nothing left to lose, who built something impossible from the wreckage of their lives. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The cabin was dying the same way everything else in Sarah Whitmore's life had died. Slowly, painfully, and without mercy. She knelt beside the fireplace, feeding it the last scraps of wood she'd broken from the porch railing that morning. The flames caught weakly, throwing shadows across walls so thin she could see daylight through the cracks. Outside, the Montana wind screamed like something wounded, battering the structure with fists of ice and snow. "Sarah?" Her mother's voice drifted from the corner where she lay buried under every blanket they owned. "Sarah, is that you?" "I'm here, Mama." Sarah didn't turn around. If she looked at her mother's face, gray as ash, eyes sunken deep, she'd lose whatever strength she had left. "Just getting the fire going." "Where's Thomas?" "Checking the traps." A lie. Thomas was 9 years old and weighed maybe 60 pounds. He was upstairs wrapped in his coat and hers both, because they only had one between them now, and she'd made him take it. The traps had been empty for 3 weeks. There was nothing left to check. Her mother coughed, a wet rattling sound that seemed to shake the whole room. Sarah closed her eyes and gripped the fire poker so hard her knuckles went white. 3 years ago, they'd had a house in town. Not a nice house, but a real one with a stove that worked and windows that closed and a father who came home every night smelling like sawdust from the lumber mill. Then the mill closed. Then her father started drinking. Then he left one morning and never came back, taking what little money they had and leaving behind debts that ate through their lives like rot through wood. Sarah had tried everything. She'd taken in washing until her hands bled. She'd sold her mother's wedding ring, her grandmother's cameo, every single thing they owned that might bring $1. She'd begged the church for help until the pastor stopped answering the door. She'd stood in the freezing street outside the general store asking for work until Mr. Patterson threatened to call the sheriff. Now here they were, 3 people and a ghost of a cabin, waiting for winter to finish what poverty had started. The knock came just as the sun started to set. Sarah froze. Nobody came out here. They were 4 miles from town, at the end of a road that had mostly turned back into forest. The only people who knew they existed were the ones who'd already decided they didn't care. The knock came again, firmer this time. Sarah stood slowly, brushed the soot from her hands, and crossed to the door. She opened it 6 inches and stopped breathing. The woman on the porch looked like she'd stepped out of a different world. She wore a coat of dark wool so fine it seemed to drink the fading light, fitted perfectly to her tall frame. Her hair, steel gray and swept into an elegant knot, was covered by a hat with a single black feather. Her face was handsome rather than beautiful, strong jaw, sharp eyes, the kind of features that made you straighten your spine without thinking about it. Behind her stood a carriage that must have cost more than Sarah's entire life. "Sarah Whitmore?" The woman's voice matched everything else about her, clear, direct, used to being heard. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Martha Brennan. May I come in?" Sarah's mind went blank. Martha Brennan. Everyone in Montana knew that name. The Brennan Ranch sprawled across 10,000 acres of prime valley land. They ran cattle, grew hay, owned half the water rights in the county. Martha's late husband had been one of the territory's first successful ranchers, and after he died, she'd kept the empire running without missing a step. What the hell was Martha Brennan doing at Sarah's dying cabin? Yes, ma'am. Of course." Sarah stepped back, suddenly aware of how the place must look, must smell. The dirt floor, the cracked walls, her mother's sickbed in the corner barely visible in the firelight. Martha stepped inside and stood very still, taking it all in with those sharp eyes. She didn't flinch, didn't wrinkle her nose, just looked. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, nodding toward the corner. "I'm sorry to intrude." Sarah's mother tried to sit up. Ma'am, we weren't expecting. Please don't trouble yourself. Martha's voice softened just slightly. She turned back to Sarah. Is there somewhere we can speak privately? Sarah glanced at the single room that made up their entire world. Not really. Then I'll be direct. Martha pulled off her gloves, one finger at a time, with the kind of careful precision that made Sarah want to hide her own cracked, reddened hands. I've come with a business proposition. We don't have any business, ma'am. Not yet. Martha's eyes locked onto hers. But I believe we can help each other. Sarah waited. She'd learned the hard way that when rich people said they wanted to help, what they usually meant was they wanted something. My nephew, Martha began. Caleb Brennan. Do you know the name? Sarah nodded slowly. Everyone knew about Caleb Brennan, the mountain man, the tracker who could follow a trail 3 weeks old, who'd killed a wolf with a knife, who'd guided hunting parties into the high country and brought them all back alive. The legend who'd survived an encounter with a grizzly bear that should have killed him, but came back broken instead. She'd heard he'd become a recluse after that, disappeared into some cabin deep in the wilderness and refused to see anyone. He needs a wife, Martha said. The words hung in the cold air like smoke. Sarah stared at her. Excuse me? I need someone to marry my nephew. Martha's tone didn't change, as if she were discussing the weather or the price of hay. In exchange, I'm prepared to offer immediate payment of $200, full medical care for your mother, including medicine and a town doctor, and housing for your entire family in one of the ranch cottages. Warm, weatherproof, fully furnished. You'll also receive a monthly allowance of $20 for as long as the marriage continues. Sarah's knees went soft. $200. That was more money than her father had made in a year at the mill. Medicine for her mother. A real house. Why? The word came out harsh. Why me? Because you're desperate enough to say yes. Martha's bluntness was almost refreshing. And because, despite your circumstances, you've kept your family alive through a winter that would have killed most people. That shows character. Caleb needs someone with character. I don't understand. If he needs a wife, there are plenty of women who'd... No! Martha cut her off. There aren't. Not for Caleb, not anymore. Something in her voice made Sarah's stomach turn over. What's wrong with him? He was mauled by a grizzly 18 months ago, up in the high country, guiding a hunting party. The bear came out of nowhere. Protective mother, her cubs nearby. By the time the other men got there, Caleb had killed her with his rifle and a hunting knife, but she'd nearly torn him apart first. Sarah felt sick. Did he? He survived, barely, spent 3 months recovering, but he's not the same man he was. Martha's jaw tightened. He walks with a cane. His left side is scarred from shoulder to hip. He has nightmares. He's angry, bitter, isolated. He shut himself away in a cabin 15 miles from the main ranch and refuses to come down. Won't see doctors, won't see friends. Barely speaks to me. Then why does he need a wife? Because he's rotting up there. The words came out sharp. Because he's 32 years old and living like he's already dead. Because someone needs to remind him he's still a human being, and I'm too old to ride up that mountain every week to argue with him. Sarah's mind spun. You want me to... What? Fix him? I want you to be his wife, live in his house, share his life. That's all. Martha's expression softened, just a fraction. I'm not asking you to love him, Sarah. I'm not even asking you to like him. I'm asking you to give him a reason to come back to the world. And in return, your family won't freeze or starve this winter. Sarah looked over at her mother, who'd gone very quiet. At the stairs where Thomas was probably listening to every word. At the fire that was already dying because there was no more wood. Can I think about it? No. Martha's voice was firm but not unkind. I need an answer now. The medicine wagon leaves town tomorrow morning. If I'm sending it here with a doctor, I need to know tonight. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Sarah. You know that better than most. Martha pulled a folded paper from her coat. This is a contract. It specifies everything I've promised. You'll marry Caleb within the week. You'll live at his cabin as his wife. The arrangement continues until either party chooses to dissolve it, at which point you'll receive a one-time settlement of $500 and retain the housing for your family. If you fulfill the marriage for 5 years, the cottage becomes yours outright. Sarah's hand shook as she took the paper. The words blurred. She couldn't focus on the legal language, couldn't process any of it beyond the impossible numbers. $200 now, 20 a month, 500 if it ended, a house forever if she lasted 5 years. Her mother would live. Thomas would eat, they'd be warm. All she had to do was marry a stranger. A broken, angry stranger, living alone in the wilderness because he couldn't face the world anymore. What if he doesn't want this? Sarah heard herself ask. What if he refuses? He won't refuse. Something flickered in Martha's eyes, pain maybe, or regret. I raised that boy after his parents died. I know him. He's not refusing life because he wants to die. He's refusing it because he doesn't know how to live anymore. You'll help him remember. I don't know how to do that. Neither did I, at your age. But you learn. You survive. That's what we do. Martha produced a pen. The question is whether you'll survive here, waiting for winter to win, or whether you'll take a chance on something different. Sarah looked at her mother one more time. Margaret Whitmore had been beautiful once. Sarah could barely remember it now. The dark hair, the quick laugh, the way she used to dance in the kitchen while making supper. Now she was a skeleton wrapped in blankets, coughing blood into rags they couldn't afford to replace. She thought about Thomas, who'd stopped asking about food because he knew there wasn't any, who'd started sleeping 18 hours a day because it was easier than being awake and hungry. She thought about her father, who'd abandoned them rather than watch them die. She wasn't going to abandon them, no matter what it cost. Sarah took the pen. Her signature looked strange and small at the bottom of the contract, like it belonged to someone else. Martha's face didn't change, but something in her shoulders relaxed. You've made the right choice. Have I? Time will tell. Martha folded the contract and tucked it away. The doctor will be here tomorrow with medicine and supplies. Day after that, a wagon will come for your mother and brother. They'll be settled in the cottage before the week is out. And me? You'll come to the main ranch in 3 days. We'll have the wedding there. Small, just family and witnesses. Then you'll go up to Caleb's cabin. Martha paused. I won't lie to you, Sarah. It won't be easy. Caleb's not the man he was, and he doesn't suffer fools or false sympathy. But he's not cruel. And somewhere under all that anger is the boy I raised. Good, loyal, decent. If anyone can reach him, I believe it's someone who understands what it means to fight for survival. Sarah nodded because she didn't trust her voice. Martha pulled her gloves back on. One more thing. Don't go up there thinking you can change him. Don't go up there with pity. He'll smell both a mile away and hate you for it. Just go up there and be honest. Be yourself. That's all you can do. Then she was gone, the door closing behind her, the sound of the carriage fading into the wind. Sarah stood in the middle of the cabin, still holding the pen, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under her life. Sarah? Her mother's voice was soft. What did you just do? What I had to. Sarah set the pen down carefully. The doctor's coming tomorrow, Mama. Real medicine. You're going to get better. And you're going to marry a stranger. Yes, a damaged stranger. We're all damaged, Mama. Sarah finally turned around. In the firelight, her mother's eyes were wet. At least this way we survive. Oh, baby. Margaret's voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you have to... Don't? Sarah crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, taking her mother's skeletal hand. Don't apologize. You didn't do this. The world did this. And now I'm doing what I have to do to fight back. What if he's terrible? What if he hurts you? Then I'll leave. The contract says I can. Sarah smoothed the blanket with her free hand. And I'll have enough money to take care of you and Thomas somewhere else. This isn't a trap, Mama. It's a chance. Margaret studied her daughter's face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there made her close her eyes. You're braver than I ever was. I learned from you. I abandoned your father. He abandoned us first. Sarah kept her voice steady. You stayed. You fought. You're still fighting. That's all I'm doing. Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs, his small face pale in the shadows. Sarah, is Mama going to be okay? Yes. Sarah stood and held out her arms. Thomas flew down the stairs and crashed into her, wrapping his thin arms around her waist. She held him tight, breathing in the smell of his hair, feeling his heart beat against her ribs. Everything's going to be okay. I promise. She'd never meant anything more or believed anything less. The doctor came at dawn just like Martha said he would. He was older, competent, and asked no questions about how they could suddenly afford his services. He examined Margaret thoroughly, listened to her chest, checked her pulse, frowned at the rattling in her lungs. "Pneumonia," he said finally. "Advanced, but treatable. She needs rest, warmth, proper food, and medicine." He produced bottles from his bag, explaining dosages and schedules. She should start improving within a week if she follows this regimen exactly. Sarah clutched the bottles like they were made of gold. "She will? I'll make sure." The doctor glanced around the cabin, taking in the dirt floor and broken walls. "Mrs. Brennan mentioned you'd be relocating soon. The sooner the better, I'd say. This environment isn't helping." After he left, Sarah sat with her mother and watched her take the first dose of medicine. Margaret grimaced at the taste but swallowed it all. Already just knowing help had arrived seemed to put color back in her face. "Tell me about him," Margaret said. "This man you're marrying." Sarah realized she barely knew anything. "His name is Caleb Brennan. He's 32. He was a mountain man, a tracker. He survived a bear attack but was badly injured. Now he lives alone in a cabin in the high country." "That's what Mrs. Brennan told you, but what do you know about him, really?" Sarah thought back to the stories she'd heard over the years, fragments of legend that had filtered down to town. They say he once tracked a lost child through a blizzard and brought her home alive. They say he knew the mountains better than anyone, could read weather in the clouds, could find water where there wasn't any. They say he was fearless. And now? Now he's broken. Sarah met her mother's eyes. "Like us." "You're not broken, Sarah." "We were getting there." Sarah stood and moved to the window. Outside, snow had started falling again, soft and relentless. "Maybe that's why this might work. We both know what it's like to lose everything. We both know what it takes to keep breathing when you don't want to. That's not a foundation for a marriage." "No," Sarah agreed, "but it's a foundation for something. Maybe that's enough." 2 days later, a wagon arrived for Margaret and Thomas. Two ranch hands, polite and professional, loaded their few possessions and helped Margaret onto the seat. She looked stronger already, or maybe just hopeful. Hope could do that. Thomas hugged Sarah so hard she thought her ribs might crack. "You're coming too, right? You're not staying here." "I'm coming," Sarah promised. "Just not yet. I have something I need to do first." "The wedding?" She nodded. "Are you scared?" "Yes." No point lying to him. "But I'm more scared of the alternative." Thomas thought about that. "Okay, but if he's mean to you, I'll fight him." Sarah laughed despite everything. "Deal." She watched the wagon roll away until it disappeared into the trees, taking her family towards safety and leaving her behind with a choice she'd already made. The next morning, Martha's carriage came for Sarah. She wore the only decent dress she owned, a dark blue cotton that had belonged to her mother years ago. It was too big and a little threadbare, but it was clean. She'd washed her hair in melted snow and braided it as neatly as her shaking hands would allow. The main Brennan ranch was overwhelming. The house was massive, 2 stories of solid timber with real glass windows and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys. Barns and outbuildings spread across the valley like a small village. Cattle dotted the winter fields, fat and healthy. This was what money looked like, real money. The kind Sarah had never imagined. Martha met her at the door, dressed in severe black. "Sarah, good. Come inside. We don't have much time." The interior of the house was just as impressive. Polished wood floors, furniture that matched, rugs without holes. Warmth radiated from a huge stone fireplace. Sarah felt like she'd stepped into a painting. "Caleb's already here," Martha said, leading her down a hallway. "He came down from the cabin this morning. I suspect he's regretting it already, but he's here." Sarah's stomach dropped. "He knows? About me?" "I told him 3 days ago." Martha's voice was neutral. "He was not pleased." "Did he agree?" "He didn't disagree. That's as close to agreement as Caleb gets these days." Martha stopped in front of a closed door. "The ceremony will be in the study. Justice of the peace, 2 witnesses. Quick and legal. Afterward, you'll both head up to his cabin. It's a 3-hour ride. I've had supplies sent ahead." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Can I meet him first, before the ceremony?" "You'll meet him during it. That's going to have to be enough." Martha's hand landed on Sarah's shoulder, firm and surprisingly warm. "Listen to me. Don't expect charm. Don't expect gratitude. Caleb's angry at the world and everyone in it, including me for arranging this and you for agreeing to it. But anger fades if you don't feed it. Just Endure. Give him time. Give yourself time. Then she opened the door. The study was smaller than Sarah expected. Books lining the walls, a massive desk, windows overlooking snow-covered fields. The justice of the peace stood near the fireplace, a thin man with spectacles and a tired expression. 2 ranch hands waited by the door as witnesses. And near the window, leaning heavily on a cane, stood Caleb Brennan. Sarah's first thought was that the stories had gotten it wrong. They'd described a legend, but the man in front of her was painfully, brutally real. He was tall, over 6 feet, with the kind of broad shoulders that came from years of hard living. His hair was dark, almost black, and long enough to touch his collar. He hadn't shaved in days, maybe longer. His face was all hard angles, strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that stopped her, dark gray, like storm clouds, and completely empty. No curiosity, no interest, no hope. He looked at Sarah the way someone might look at a piece of furniture they didn't want but were stuck with anyway. "Caleb," Martha said, "this is Sarah Whitmore." He said nothing, just shifted his weight on the cane, and Sarah caught the flash of pain that crossed his face before he locked it down again. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Mr. Brennan, let's get this over with." His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. He turned to the justice of the peace. "You ready?" The ceremony lasted maybe 5 minutes. Sarah barely heard the words. She was too aware of Caleb standing beside her, radiating hostility like heat from a stove. When the justice asked if she took him as her husband, she said yes in a voice that didn't sound like hers. When Caleb was asked the same question, he said yes, like he was admitting to a crime. There were no rings, no kiss, no congratulations. "That's done then," Martha said when the justice closed his book. She produced an envelope and handed it to Sarah. $200, as agreed. The rest will follow according to the contract. Sarah took it with numb fingers. She'd never held that much money in her life. "The horses are ready," Martha continued. "You should leave now while there's still good light. The trail's not easy in winter." Caleb was already moving toward the door, his cane thumping against the wood floor. He didn't look back to see if Sarah was following. She was his wife now. She followed. The horses were waiting outside, a sturdy roan for Caleb and a smaller gray mare for Sarah. Her trunk was already strapped to a pack horse. Caleb mounted with surprising grace despite the cane, which he secured to the saddle. Once up, he sat like he'd been born there, comfortable and controlled. The injuries clearly hadn't taken that from him. Sarah climbed onto the mare with less confidence. She could ride, her father had taught her years ago, but not well, and not in conditions like this. They rode out without a word, leaving the ranch behind. The trail climbed steadily into the mountains. Snow crunched under the horses' hooves. Wind cut through Sarah's coat like it wasn't there. Ahead, Caleb rode in silence, his back straight, his shoulders tense. An hour passed, then 2. Sarah's hands went numb even inside her gloves. Her face ached from the cold. The mare stumbled on a patch of ice, and Sarah's heart leapt into her throat, but the horse recovered and kept going. Caleb never looked back. Not once. As the sun started to sink, turning the snow gold and then orange, the trail leveled out. Through the trees ahead, Sarah glimpsed a cabin. It was bigger than she'd expected. Solid logs, a stone chimney, a covered porch. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant someone had been up earlier to start a fire. Probably one of the ranch hands. Caleb dismounted, tied his horse, and grabbed his cane. He crossed to the cabin door, pushed it open, and disappeared inside without a word. Sarah sat on her horse, alone in the freezing twilight, and wondered what the hell she'd done. Finally, she climbed down. Her legs nearly gave out. 3 hours of riding in the cold had turned her muscles to stone. She tied the mare next to Caleb's horse and approached the cabin on shaking legs. Inside it was warm. The fire was going strong, and the space was nice. One large main room with a kitchen area at one end, a table and chairs, a sitting area with a sofa that had seen better days. A ladder led up to a loft. Everything was clean but spare, functional, nothing extra. Caleb stood near the fire, feeding it more wood. He still hadn't looked at her. "There's a room through there," he said, nodding toward a door on the far wall. "It's yours. I sleep in the loft. There's food in the pantry,
water from the pump outside, firewood stacked on the porch. Sarah waited for more. Nothing came. "Okay," she said finally. "I leave early most mornings. Check traps, cut wood, whatever needs doing. I'm not much for conversation." He straightened, gripping the cane. "You do what you want during the day. Cook if you feel like it. Don't if you don't. I'm not your boss." "You're my husband." His laugh was bitter. "On paper. But you and I both know what this is. You needed money. My aunt needed someone to babysit me. So here we are. Let's not pretend it's anything more than that." The word stung more than Sarah expected. "I'm not pretending anything." "Good." He finally looked at her, and the emptiness in his eyes was worse than anger would have been. "Then we'll get along fine. Stay out of my way. I'll stay out of yours. Time passes. Eventually this ends. Simple." He moved toward the ladder, his limp pronounced now that he wasn't trying to hide it. "Caleb, don't." He stopped, his back to her. "Don't try to fix me. Don't try to understand me. Don't try to make this into something it's not. You're here because you had to be. I'm here because I don't have anywhere else to go. That's all there is." He climbed the ladder slowly, painfully, and disappeared into the loft. Sarah stood in the warm cabin, surrounded by silence, and felt the weight of the next 5 years settle onto her shoulders like stones. She crossed to the small bedroom, barely big enough for a bed and a dresser, and closed the door. Through the small window, she could see stars beginning to appear over the mountains. She'd saved her family. Her mother would live. Thomas would grow up warm and fed. That's what mattered. That's what she had to remember. Whatever happened here, whatever this strange, cold marriage became, she'd done what she had to do. She just hoped it would be enough. Sarah woke to silence so complete it felt like drowning. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the unfamiliar weight of the quilt registered, the hardness of the narrow bed, the cold seeping through the cabin walls. Memory crashed back. The wedding. The ride. Caleb's empty eyes telling her to stay away. She sat up, breath misting in the frigid air. Through the small window, dawn was just starting to bleed gray light across the mountains. She could hear nothing from the main room. No footsteps, no fire crackling, nothing. When she finally worked up the courage to open her door, the cabin was empty. The fire had burned down to coals. Caleb's coat was gone from the hook by the door. Through the window, she could see his horse missing from the small corral. He'd left without a word, without even waking her. Sarah stood in the cold cabin wearing yesterday's dress and felt anger spark in her chest. Fine. If that's how he wanted it, fine. She didn't need him anyway. She rebuilt the fire, pumped icy water from the sink, and explored the pantry. Someone, probably Martha, had stocked it well. Flour, salt, dried beans, coffee, sugar, even some preserved meat. More food than Sarah had seen in months. She made coffee strong enough to strip paint and tried to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do with herself. The answer came slowly as the cabin warmed and the caffeine hit her system. She was here for at least a year, probably longer. This was her home now, whether Caleb liked it or not. She could either sit in her room feeling sorry for herself, or she could make this place livable. Sarah chose the latter. She started with the dishes. A few crusty plates and cups piled in the basin. Then she swept the floor, which clearly hadn't been touched in weeks. She wiped down the table, organized the pantry shelves, scrubbed the coffee pot until it gleamed. The work felt good, normal, like she was building something instead of just surviving. By midday, the cabin looked different. Not perfect. The furniture was still worn, the walls still bare, but clean, cared for. Sarah made bread because she could, and because the smell of it baking filled the empty space with something that felt like hope. She was pulling the loaves from the oven when the door opened. Caleb stopped in the doorway, covered in snow, carrying a brace of rabbits. He stared at the cabin like he'd walked into the wrong house. "What did you do?" His voice was sharp. Sarah set down the bread. "Cleaned." "I didn't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask me not to." She met his eyes. "I have to live here too. I'm not going to live in filth." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or irritation. He couldn't seem to decide which. Finally, he just grunted and moved past her to dump the rabbits on the counter. "Can you dress game?" he asked. "Yes." "Then make yourself useful." He grabbed his cane and headed for the ladder. Sarah watched him climb,
saw how his left leg dragged slightly, how his jaw clenched with each step. When he disappeared into the loft, she turned to the rabbits and got to work. She'd learned to dress game as a child. Her father had taught her before the drinking got bad. The knife was sharp, her hand steady. By the time Caleb came back down an hour later, she had both rabbits cleaned and in a pot with onions and herbs she'd found in the pantry. He stood in the kitchen doorway watching her work. Sarah ignored him. "You cook too," he said finally. "I do a lot of things." Aunt Martha picked well. The sarcasm in his voice made her teeth clench. She turned around, knife still in her hand. "Is that what you think? That she picked me like livestock? Didn't she? She made me an offer. I accepted it. That's business, not shopping." Sarah pointed the knife at him. "And before you climb up on your high horse about it, remember that you agreed to this too. So if I'm livestock, what does that make you?" Caleb's eyes narrowed. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the kitchen. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, not even close. But it was the first crack in his armor she'd seen. "Fair enough," he muttered, and turned away. They ate dinner in silence. The stew was good. Sarah had always been a decent cook, and Caleb ate 2 bowls without comment. Afterward, he sat by the fire cleaning his rifle while Sarah washed the dishes. "I go out early," he said, without looking up. "Usually before dawn. I'll be gone most of the day." Doing what? Checking trap lines, hunting, cutting firewood, things that need doing. He ran the cleaning rod down the barrel with practiced precision. "There's a horse in the barn, the gray mare from yesterday. She's yours if you need to go anywhere." "Where would I go?" "Town's 15 miles southwest. The main ranch is 12 miles northeast." "You're not a prisoner here." Sarah dried the last plate. "It feels like we both are." Caleb's hand stilled. "Nobody forced you to come." "Nobody forced you to agree either." She hung up the towel. "But here we are. 2 people who don't want to be married, living in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, pretending this is normal. It's not pretending if we both know the truth. Maybe that's the problem." Sarah moved to the fire, close enough to feel its heat, but not so close she was crowding him. "We're so busy being honest about how much we don't want this that we're not even trying to make it bearable." Caleb finally looked at her. In the firelight, his scars were visible, pale lines running down the left side of his neck, disappearing under his shirt. The bear had marked him permanently. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" The question caught her off guard. She thought about it, turning over possible answers, rejecting the ones that were too much or too little. "Civility," she said finally. "I'm not asking for friendship or affection or anything you can't give, just basic human decency. We live in the same space, we eat the same food. We're going to see each other every day. Can we at least try not to make each other miserable?" Caleb stared into the fire. "I'm not good company anymore." "I'm not asking for good company. I'm asking for company that doesn't actively hate me for existing." "I don't hate you." "Could have fooled me." He set down the rifle carefully. "I hate the situation. I hate that my aunt thinks I need a babysitter. I hate that she paid someone to pretend to care whether I live or die. But I don't hate you." It was the most honest thing he'd said since she'd arrived. Sarah felt something in her chest loosen slightly. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I'm not pretending to care. I don't know you well enough to care. But I'm not pretending anything. This is exactly what it looks like. A business arrangement between 2 desperate people. Nothing more, nothing less." Caleb studied her face like he was trying to decide if she was lying. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded once. "Okay. Okay. Civility. I can do that." He picked up the rifle again. "Don't expect miracles, but I'll try not to be a complete bastard." Sarah almost smiled. "I'll take what I can get." The next few days fell into a rhythm that was less comfortable than simply tolerable. Caleb left before dawn and returned at dusk. Sarah kept the cabin clean, cooked meals, and tried not to think too hard about the strangeness of her new life. They spoke in short sentences about practical things, food supplies, weather, whether the firewood needed restocking. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. On the 4th day, Sarah walked down to the barn to check on the mare. The barn was small but well built, smelling of hay and horse. The gray mare nickered when she saw Sarah, and Sarah spent an hour brushing her coat and talking to her about nothing in particular. She was heading back to the cabin when she heard the sound, something between a shout and a groan coming from inside. Sarah ran. She burst through the door to find Caleb on the floor beside the table, his cane several feet away, his face white with pain. What happened? Nothing. I'm fine. He reached for the table leg, trying to pull himself up. You're on the floor. That's not fine. Sarah moved toward him. Don't. The word came out hard. Don't touch me. I can get up myself. Your pride isn't worth a broken bone. My pride is all I have left. But his voice shook, and his left leg was bent at an angle that looked wrong. Sarah ignored his protests and grabbed his arm. On 3. 1, 2. She hauled him up. Caleb gasped, grabbing the table for support, his weight heavy against her shoulder. For a moment they stood there, too close, both breathing hard. Where does it hurt? Sarah asked. Everywhere. He laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. The leg mostly, and my back and my shoulder. Pick one. Sit down. I'm fine. Sit. Down. Sarah pushed a chair toward him. Before you fall down, and we have to do this again. He sat, mostly because he didn't have a choice. Sarah retrieved his cane and set it within reach, then stepped back. What happened? Leg gave out. Happens sometimes. Caleb rubbed his thigh, wincing. Muscles don't work right anymore. Nerve damage from the attack. Does it happen often? Often enough. He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw something other than anger or emptiness in his eyes. She saw exhaustion. You can leave if you want. Tell Martha it didn't work out. She'll honor the contract, give you the settlement. You don't have to stay here watching me fall apart. Sarah pulled out another chair and sat down across from him. Is that what you think? That I'm looking for an excuse to leave? Most people would. I'm not most people. She leaned forward. I grew up watching my father drink himself to death. I spent the last year watching my mother waste away from sickness we couldn't afford to treat. I know what it looks like when someone's falling apart. And I'm still here. That's different. How? They were your family. You loved them. Caleb's voice was flat. You don't love me. You don't even like me. Why would you stay for this? It was a fair question. Sarah didn't have a good answer, so she told him the truth. Because I made a promise. Not to you, to myself. I promised I wouldn't run when things got hard. I promised I'd see this through, whatever this turns out to be. She met his eyes. And maybe because watching someone suffer alone feels wrong, even if that someone is a stranger who mostly wishes I wasn't here. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I don't wish you weren't here, he said finally. I wish you didn't have to be. There's a difference. It was the kindest thing he'd said to her. Sarah felt something shift between them. Not warmth, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. I might not answer. The bear. Do you remember it? Caleb's jaw tightened. Every second. What happened? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking, his voice low and distant, like he was describing something that had happened to someone else. We were 3 days into the mountains, hunting party from back east, rich men who wanted trophies and adventure. I was guiding them, like I'd done 100 times before. We tracked an elk herd up into the high country, made camp near a stream. Everything was fine. He paused, rubbing his leg absently. Next morning, one of the men wandered off to piss, came back shouting about a grizzly, said it was huge, wanted to shoot it. I told him no. Told him we were in her territory, she had cubs nearby. I'd seen the signs. Told him we needed to pack up and move out quietly. But he didn't listen. Rich men never do. Sarah could already see where this was going. He tracked her. I followed to keep him from getting killed. Found the sow with 2 cubs in a berry patch. She saw us same time we saw her. I tried to back away slow, hands up, talking calm, but the bastard raised his rifle. The sound spooked her. Caleb's knuckles were white on the chair arm. She charged. I shot her twice, but she kept coming. Hit her in the chest, in the shoulder, didn't matter. She went straight for the other man, knocked him down. I got between them, emptied the rifle into her. She dropped him and turned on me. Caleb, 600 pounds of muscle and rage. His voice didn't change, but his hands were shaking now. She hit me like a falling tree, broke 3 ribs. Her claws opened up my side from shoulder to hip. I felt my shoulder separate. Felt my leg snap. Managed to get my knife out and put it in her throat, but she didn't die fast enough. She kept tearing at me, kept biting. I remember thinking this was it.
This was how I died. Ripped apart on a mountain because some rich fool couldn't follow simple instructions. Sarah felt sick. The other men finally got there, shot her off me. By then I'd lost so much blood I couldn't see straight. They got me down the mountain somehow, got me to a doctor. He put me back together as best he could, but some things don't heal right. The leg, the shoulder, the scars. He finally looked at her. But the worst part isn't the pain or the scars or not being able to walk without a cane. The worst part is knowing I was good at something once. I knew those mountains. I could track anything, survive anything. I was somebody. And now I'm this, half a man who can't even stand up without falling down. You're not half a man, Sarah said quietly. That's what it feels like. Feelings aren't facts. She stood up. You survived. That's not nothing. Surviving isn't living. Then maybe it's time to figure out the difference. Caleb stared at her. You sound like my aunt. Your aunt is smart. My aunt is meddling. She's trying to help. By buying me a wife? Caleb's laugh was bitter. That's not help. That's pity dressed up as charity. Sarah felt her temper flare. You want to know what pity looks like? Pity is people who see you suffering and look away because it makes them uncomfortable. Pity is leaving you alone to rot in a cabin because dealing with your pain is too hard. Your aunt didn't do that. She found someone willing to stay. Someone willing to watch you fall and help you stand back up. That's not pity, Caleb. That's hope. And if you're too bitter to see the difference, that's your problem, not hers. She turned and walked to her room, slamming the door harder than necessary. Behind her, Caleb sat in silence. That night, Sarah lay in bed listening to him climb the ladder to the loft. It took longer than usual. She counted each labored step, heard his breathing go rough with pain, heard the soft curse when he finally reached the top. She didn't sleep well. Every time she started to drift off, she'd see the image of him on the floor, white-faced and shaking, too proud to ask for help. Morning came gray and cold. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee. She opened her door cautiously. Caleb stood at the stove, fully dressed, pouring coffee into 2 cups. He glanced over when he heard her. Morning. Sarah blinked. Morning. He held out one of the cups. She took it carefully, like it might bite her. About yesterday, Caleb said. You were right. About the pity thing. And about my aunt. She's trying to help. I've been too angry to see it. Sarah sipped her coffee, buying time. Okay. And you staying when I fell. That was decent of you, even though I was an ass about it. You were scared. I was an ass. He met her eyes. I'm trying to say thank you. I'm not good at it anymore, but I'm trying. Something warm unfurled in Sarah's chest. You're welcome. They drank their coffee in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Less hostile. Almost comfortable. I need to go into town today, Caleb said finally. Get supplies. You want to come? Sarah nearly dropped her cup. You're asking me to come with you? Civility, remember? We're married. People are going to talk if you never leave the cabin. Might as well show up together, let them get their gossip out of the way. He paused. Unless you'd rather stay here. No, I'll come. Sarah set down her cup. Give me 10 minutes to change. The ride to town was long and cold, but Caleb rode slower than he had on the way up, checking occasionally to make sure Sarah was keeping pace. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt less like a wall and more like a truce. The town was small. One main street, a general store, a church, a saloon, a handful of houses. People stopped what they were doing to stare as they rode past. Sarah felt their eyes like brands. She knew what they were thinking. The poor Whitmore girl who'd sold herself to the crippled hermit, the desperate woman and the broken man. Let them think it. She'd survived worse than gossip. They tied the horses outside the general store. Caleb climbed down carefully, and this time Sarah didn't offer to help. She'd learned that much, at least. Inside, the store smelled like coffee and sawdust. The owner, a balding man with suspicious eyes, looked up from behind the counter. Caleb, didn't expect to see you. Need supplies, Patterson. Sure. Patterson's gaze slid to Sarah. This the new wife, then? Sarah Brennan, Caleb said, and something in his voice made it clear the subject wasn't open for discussion.
We need flour, coffee, sugar, salt, and whatever dried goods you have in stock. While Patterson gathered the supplies, Sarah wandered the store. It was bigger than she'd expected, with shelves of canned goods and tools and fabric. She ran her fingers over a bolt of dark green cloth, remembering when she used to help her mother sew. "You need anything?" Caleb's voice came from behind her. Sarah dropped her hand. "No, I'm fine." "You sure? Aunt Martha set up an account. You can get whatever you need." "I don't need anything." Caleb studied her face. "When's the last time you bought something just because you wanted it?" The question caught her off guard. She couldn't remember. Years, maybe. "Get the fabric," Caleb said. "I don't get it. Make yourself a new dress or curtains or whatever. Just get it." He turned back to the counter, conversation over. Sarah bought the fabric, along with thread and needles. The total came to more than she'd spent on herself in the last year combined. Patterson wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with string. "Congratulations on the marriage," he said, with all the warmth of someone congratulating you on a funeral. "Thanks," Sarah said flatly. Outside, they loaded the supplies onto the horses. Sarah was tying down her package when she heard voices from across the street. "That's her, the Whitmore girl. Heard she married him for money. Family was practically starving. Can you imagine? Living up there with him, alone. He's not right in the head anymore, you know? Not after what happened." Sarah's hand stilled on the rope. Caleb was close enough that he must have heard too. She glanced at him, expecting anger. Instead, he was smiling. Not a happy smile, something colder, sharper. "Come here," he said quietly. Sarah moved closer. Caleb put his arm around her waist, pulling her against his side. The gesture was casual, almost possessive. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Giving them something to talk about." He looked down at her, and his voice dropped lower. "You want them to think you're some desperate girl who sold herself? Or do you want them to think I'm the one who got lucky?" Before Sarah could answer, he kissed her. It wasn't romantic. It was deliberate, calculated, and designed to be seen. His mouth was warm against hers, his hand firm on her waist. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. When he pulled back, the voices across the street had gone silent. Caleb helped Sarah onto her horse without another word. They rode out of town with every eye on their backs. A mile down the trail, Sarah finally found her voice. "What the hell was that?" "Theater." Caleb didn't look at her. "You want respect? You don't get it by looking ashamed. You get it by making them believe you have nothing to be ashamed of." "So you just decided to kiss me in the middle of the street?" "I decided to make a point." "Did it work?" Sarah thought about the stunned silence, the shocked faces. "Probably." "Then you're welcome." They rode the rest of the way home in silence, but Sarah's lips still tingled with the memory of it. That night, she made stew from the fresh vegetables they'd bought in town. Caleb ate 3 bowls and complimented the cooking. After dinner, he sat by the fire cleaning his boots while Sarah worked on cutting the green fabric. "What are you making?" he asked. "Curtains for my room, and maybe a shirt." "You sew?" "My mother taught me." Caleb nodded. "She doing better? Your mother?" Sarah's hand stilled. It was the first time he'd asked about her family. "The last letter said she's improving. The medicine is working. Thomas is settling in at the cottage." "Good. That's good." They fell quiet again. Sarah cut fabric. Caleb cleaned boots. Outside, snow began to fall. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "That kiss, in town. Did you—" She stopped, not sure how to finish the question. "Did I what? Did you mean it? Or was it really just theater?" He looked up at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Does it matter?" "I don't know. Maybe." Caleb set down the boot. "I meant it enough to do it. Whether that means anything beyond the moment is up to you to decide." It wasn't an answer, but it wasn't a dismissal either. Sarah went back to her sewing, and Caleb went back to his boots. And the snow kept falling outside the warm cabin where 2 strangers were slowly, carefully, learning how to share the same space without destroying each other. It wasn't love. It wasn't even close. But it was something, and for now, that was enough. 2 weeks passed before Sarah worked up the nerve to say what had been building in her mind since that day in town. She waited until evening, until Caleb had finished his supper and settled by the fire with the rifle he was always cleaning. The man treated that weapon like some people treated children. Constant attention, careful maintenance, never far from reach. "I want to learn to ride properly," she said. Caleb didn't look up from the cleaning rod. "You can ride. I've seen you." "I can stay on a horse." "That's not the same thing." Sarah set down her sewing. "You grew up in these mountains. You know how to handle terrain like this. I don't. If something happened, if I needed to get to town fast or find help, I'd probably break my neck trying. Nothing's going to happen." "You don't know that." He finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What brought this on?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I don't like being helpless. I've spent too much of my life depending on other people to save me. I want to be able to save myself." Something shifted in Caleb's eyes. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. He set down the rifle. "Tomorrow morning, early. We'll start with the basics." The next morning came cold and clear. Sarah dressed in her oldest clothes and met Caleb at the barn just after dawn. The gray mare nickered softly when she saw them. "Her name's Ash," Caleb said, running a hand down the mare's neck. "She's steady. Won't spook easy. Good horse for learning." He showed Sarah how to saddle properly, checking every strap twice. His hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the stiffness in his left side. When he was satisfied, he handed her the reins. "Mount up." Sarah climbed into the saddle. Caleb watched critically, then shook his head. "Your seat's too far back, shifts your center of gravity. Move forward. There. Now straighten your spine. Heels down. Hands lighter on the reins. She's not going to run off on you." They spent an hour in the corral with Caleb calling instructions while Sarah walked, trotted, and tried not to feel ridiculous. He was patient but demanding, making her repeat movements until they felt natural. "Better," he said finally. "Now let's see how you handle real terrain." They rode out into the forest, following trails Sarah hadn't known existed. Caleb led on his roan, moving through the trees with the kind of easy confidence that made it clear these mountains were still his territory, injuries or not. "Watch where you're looking," he called back. "Your body follows your eyes. Look at the obstacle. You'll hit the obstacle. Look past it to where you want to go." Sarah tried it. Somehow it worked. Ash moved more smoothly, responding to shifts in Sarah's weight that she wasn't even aware of making. They climbed higher. The trail narrowed, hemmed in by pine trees heavy with snow. Caleb slowed his horse and glanced back. "You good?" "Yes." "You sure?" "It gets steeper from here." "I'm sure." He studied her face, then nodded and kept going. The trail climbed along a ridge that dropped off sharply on one side. Sarah tried not to look down, focusing instead on Ash's steady gait and Caleb's straight back ahead of her. The wind picked up, sharp and cold, carrying the smell of pine and snow. When they finally stopped, they were high enough that Sarah could see the valley spread out below, a patchwork of white fields and dark forest, the ribbon of the river cutting through it all. The main Brennan Ranch was visible in the distance, looking impossibly small. "This is where I used to come," Caleb said quietly. "Before. When I needed to think." Sarah guided Ash up beside his roan. "It's beautiful. It's honest. Mountains don't lie to you. Don't pretend to be something they're not." He was quiet for a moment. "I missed this. Being up here. Seeing things from this angle. Why'd you stop coming?" "Pride, mostly. Couldn't handle the thought of struggling up trails I used to run. Couldn't stand the idea of people seeing me weak." He looked at her. "Your fault I'm here now." "My fault?" "You asked to learn to ride. Couldn't teach you from the cabin." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Guess I got outmaneuvered." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest despite the cold. "You could have said no." "I could have. Didn't want to." They sat on their horses looking out over the valley, and Sarah felt something shift between them. Not friendship exactly, but the foundation of it. The beginning of trust. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. "You keep asking that. The answer's still yes." "Why did you agree to marry me? Really?" Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. "Because Aunt Martha asked, and because she was right. I was rotting up here, dying slower than if the bear had finished me, but dying all the same." He adjusted his grip on the reins. "And maybe because some part of me remembered what it felt like to be alive, and that part wasn't ready to give up yet." Are you glad she asked? Ask me in a year. But his voice was softer than the words suggested. They rode back as the sun started to sink, painting the snow gold and orange. Sarah's legs ached and her hands were frozen, but she felt more capable than she had in years. More like herself. That night, Caleb made dinner, venison steaks and fried potatoes. They ate together at the table instead of in separate silences, and when Sarah mentioned she'd like to visit her mother and Thomas soon, Caleb just nodded. We'll go next week. Stay a couple days if you want. You'd come with me? We're married. People expect us to do things together sometimes. He cut another piece of venison. Besides, I should meet your family properly. Make sure they know you're not being mistreated up here. Sarah smiled. Are you worried about your reputation, Caleb Brennan? I'm worried about yours. There's a difference. The riding lessons became routine. Every few days, they'd head out into the mountains, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for most of the day. Caleb taught her to read the weather and the clouds, to spot game trails, to understand how the land spoke if you knew how to listen. And slowly, without either of them quite acknowledging it, he started talking more. About his childhood following his uncle around the ranch. About learning to track from an old mountain man who'd lived like a ghost in the high country. About the years he'd spent guiding hunters and traders. About camps under the stars and trails that went on forever. You miss it, Sarah said one afternoon. They'd stopped to rest the horses beside a frozen creek. Every damn day. Caleb leaned against a tree, taking weight off his bad leg. Being out here was the only time I felt like I made sense. In town, with people, I always felt wrong, too rough, too quiet. But in the mountains, I knew exactly who I was. You're still that person. No, that person could walk 20 miles without breaking a sweat. That person could track an elk for 3 days straight. That person was useful. Sarah dismounted and crossed to where he stood. You tracked those rabbits you brought home last week. You taught me to ride in terrain that would have killed me a month ago. You know these mountains better injured than most people would know them healthy. That sounds pretty useful to me. It's not the same. Nothing's ever the same after you survive something that should have killed you. That doesn't mean it's worse, just different. Caleb looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You have an answer for everything, don't you? I have an answer for most things. The rest I'm making up as I go. He laughed, an actual laugh, short and rough but real. Sarah felt absurdly proud of pulling that sound out of him. Come on, he said, pushing off from the tree. There's something I want to show you. He led her deeper into the forest, following a trail so faint Sarah would never have spotted it on her own. The trees grew thicker here, blocking out most of the light. After 20 minutes of careful riding, the forest opened up. They emerged at the edge of a clearing. In the center stood the skeleton of an old cabin, roof mostly collapsed, walls barely standing, nature slowly reclaiming what humans had built. Trapper's cabin, Caleb said. Been here since before the territory was settled. I found it when I was 16, thought it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. Sarah studied the ruins. Why bring me here? Because I want to rebuild it. He dismounted carefully, favoring his bad leg. Been thinking about it for a while. Cabin's in good enough shape that it could be salvaged. Location's perfect. Near water, sheltered from wind, good hunting nearby. Could be a line camp. Somewhere to stay when we're out this far. We? He glanced at her. You've been learning to ride for a reason, haven't you? Figured you might want to actually use it for something. Sarah felt something warm and bright unfold in her chest. He was including her, planning a future that had her in it. When would we start? Spring. Ground's too frozen now and we'd need lumber from the ranch. But come April, May, we could do it. He walked toward the ruins and Sarah saw the change in him. His shoulders were straighter, his voice stronger. I used to build things, helped construct half the outbuildings on the ranch when I was younger. Miss working with my hands like that. Sarah joined him at the cabin's remains. Up close she could see what he meant. The foundation was solid stone, the main support beam still strong. With work, it could be something again. I'll help, she said. Caleb turned to her. It'll be hard work, long days, a lot of heavy lifting. I'm not afraid of hard work. I know, that's why I'm asking. He held her gaze. We'd be up here for weeks at a time, away from everything, just us and whatever we can build. You sure you want that? Sarah thought about the cabin they lived in now, Thought about the careful distance they'd maintained, the way they still circled each other like strangers most days. Thought about what it might mean to spend weeks working side by side on something that was theirs. I'm sure. They rode back as dusk settled over the mountains. Caleb was quieter than usual, but it was a thoughtful quiet rather than a hostile one. When they reached the barn, he helped Sarah unsaddle Ash, the first time he'd done that. "You did good today," he said. "With the riding, you're learning fast." "I have a good teacher. I used to be better." "You're good enough." Inside, Sarah made coffee while Caleb started a fire. The cabin had begun to feel different over the past weeks. Less like a place she was trapped and more like a place she belonged. Small things had changed. Her curtains hung in the window. Her sewing basket sat beside the sofa. Caleb had hung hooks by the door for both their coats. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, and Sarah found herself studying him. The hard lines of his face had softened slightly. He didn't flinch away from her presence anymore. Sometimes, when he forgot to guard himself, she caught glimpses of the man he must have been before the bear. Strong, capable, almost at ease. "Sarah?" His voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Yeah?" "Thank you for today, for listening to me talk about the cabin rebuild, for not thinking it's stupid." "Why would I think it's stupid?" "Because I'm a cripple who can barely walk trying to plan construction projects in the mountains." The bitterness in his voice was back. "Because it's probably more than I can handle. Or maybe it's exactly what you can handle, and you're just scared to try." Sarah set down her coffee. "You're not a cripple, Caleb. You're injured. There's a difference. And injured people can still build things, still create things, still matter." "Is that what you tell yourself when you remember you sold yourself to a stranger for $200? The words were meant to hurt. Sarah refused to let them land. "I tell myself I did what I had to do to save my family. I tell myself I'm stronger than I thought. And I tell myself that maybe this strange arrangement is turning into something that isn't completely terrible." She stood up. "You want to push me away? Fine. But you're going to have to try harder than that." She went to her room and closed the door, heart pounding with anger and something else she couldn't quite name. The next morning, she found a note on the table. "Gone to the ranch. Back tomorrow. Coffee's made." Sarah stared at the note, feeling irrationally abandoned, which was stupid. Caleb had every right to go to the ranch without her. They weren't actually married in any real sense. This was still just business. Except it hadn't felt like business yesterday. It had felt like partnership, like possibility. Sarah spent the day cleaning obsessively, trying not to think about why his absence bothered her so much. By evening, she'd reorganized the entire pantry and mended every piece of clothing she owned. She was reading by candlelight when she heard the horse. Caleb came through the door carrying a wooden crate. He was covered in snow and looked exhausted, but there was something different in his eyes. Something almost like excitement. "What's that?" Sarah asked. "Tools, wood, nails, everything we need to start planning the cabin rebuild." He set the crate down with a thud. "Talk to Aunt Martha. She's agreed to supply materials. Said it's a good project. Good for me to have something to work toward." Sarah stared at him. "You went all the way to the ranch to get supplies for a cabin we're not building until spring?" "I went to the ranch because I needed to think. And while I was thinking, I realized you were right about me being scared, about pushing you away." He pulled off his coat. "So I'm trying not to do that. This is me trying." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Caleb, let me finish." He crossed to the fire, needing something to do with his hands. "I've been alone a long time, got used to it, got comfortable with the idea that this was just how things were going to be. And then you showed up, and you're stubborn and honest, and you don't let me get away with feeling sorry for myself. And it's terrifying." "Why terrifying?" Because what if I start depending on you being here, and then you leave? What if I let myself care and it all falls apart?" He turned to face her. "I've lost a lot, Sarah. I don't know if I can handle losing more." Sarah stood and crossed to him. They were close enough now that she could see the firelight reflected in his eyes, could count the days since he'd shaved. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly. "I signed a contract, remember? You're stuck with me." "That's not what I mean." "I know what you mean." She took a breath. "And I'm still not going anywhere. Not because of the contract. Because I don't want to." The words hung between them, honest and raw. Caleb reached out slowly and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear.
His fingers were rough and warm against her skin. I don't know how to do this, he said. Do what? Care about someone. Be married. Be anything other than angry and broken. Then we'll figure it out together. Sarah caught his hand before he could pull it away. That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? Two people stumbling through life together, making it up as they go. That's not what ours is. Maybe it could be. Caleb studied her face like he was trying to memorize it. Then, slowly, carefully, he leaned down and kissed her. It was nothing like the kiss in town. That had been performance, calculation. This was something else entirely, tentative and honest and real. His mouth was gentle against hers, asking rather than taking. Sarah kissed him back, her free hand finding his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. When they broke apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to mess this up, he whispered. I'm going to say the wrong thing, or push too hard, or forget how to be human. I'm going to disappoint you. Probably, Sarah agreed, and I'm going to be stubborn and difficult, and push you when you want to be left alone. I'm going to frustrate you. You already do, she smiled. Good. Means we're even. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other, and Sarah felt the last of the walls between them start to crack. Over the next weeks, something shifted between them that went beyond words. Caleb started coming to bed later, finding excuses to sit with Sarah by the fire. They talked about everything and nothing, his childhood, her family, the mountains, the future. He told her about hunts that had gone wrong, about winters that had nearly killed him, about the first time he'd seen a wolf pack bring down an elk. Sarah told him about her father's drinking, about watching her mother waste away, about the suffocating fear of knowing she couldn't save them. Told him about the morning she'd woken up and realized they had nothing left, that without a miracle, they'd all be dead by spring. You were the miracle, she said one night, or Martha was, or this whole strange situation. I don't know which, but here we are. My mother's alive, Thomas is safe, and I'm sitting in a warm cabin with a husband I actually like talking to. That's more than I ever dared hope for. Caleb reached across the space between them and took her hand. It was becoming easier for him to do that, to touch her without thinking, to bridge the physical distance that had defined their early weeks together. You're easy to talk to, he said. I forgot what that felt like, having someone who listens without trying to fix everything. I can't fix you, Caleb. Only you can do that. I know. That's why it works. On a cold February morning, Caleb made an announcement that shocked Sarah into silence. I want to try riding up to the old trapper's cabin, he said over breakfast. Actually try it. Not just visit, but spend a night or two up there. See if I can still handle it. Sarah set down her coffee carefully. Are you sure? That's a long ride. And camping in winter? I used to do it all the time. Sleep under the stars in weather worse than this. He met her eyes. I need to know if I still can. Need to know if that part of me is completely dead or just sleeping. When were you thinking? Next week. Give me time to prepare gear, make sure we have supplies. He paused. I want you to come with me. Me? You've been learning to ride for this, haven't you? To be able to handle the mountains? This is your chance to prove you can. His expression softened. And I don't want to do it alone. If I'm going to fail, I'd rather fail in front of someone who won't treat me like I'm broken afterward. Sarah felt her heart squeeze. You're not going to fail. You don't know that. Neither do you. So we might as well find out together. They spent the next week preparing. Caleb checked and rechecked gear, planned the route, packed and repacked supplies. Sarah could see the nervous energy in him, the way his hands shook slightly when he thought she wasn't looking. The night before they were supposed to leave, he couldn't sleep. Sarah heard him moving around in the loft, heard the creak of floorboards as he paced. She climbed the ladder and found him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at nothing. Talk to me, she said. What if I can't do it? What if we get halfway there and my leg gives out, or I can't handle the pain, or I just freeze up? The words tumbled out fast and desperate. What if I've built this up in my head, and I'm not even a shadow of what I used to be? Sarah sat down beside him. Then we turn around and come home. That's not failure, Caleb. That's knowing your limits. My limits used to be nothing. I used to be able to do anything out there. And now you can do less, but less isn't nothing. She took his hand. You're still the man who knows these mountains, who taught me to ride, who survived a grizzly bear tearing him apart. That man is still in there. He's just carrying more scars now. Caleb looked at their joined hands.
What if the scars are all that's left? Then the scars are enough.
Sarah squeezed his fingers. But I don't think they are. I think tomorrow we're going to ride up to that cabin, and you're going to remember what it feels like to be alive in the wilderness. And even if it's harder than it used to be, even if it hurts, you're still going to do it because you're stubborn and proud, and you don't quit. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he lifted her hand and pressed it against his chest, over his heart. "Stay," he said quietly. "Just for tonight. I don't want to be alone." Sarah stayed. They lay down together on the narrow bed, fully clothed, and Caleb wrapped his arms around her like she was something precious. Sarah listened to his breathing slow, felt his body relax against hers, and realized with sudden clarity that somewhere in the last 2 months, this had stopped being an arrangement. She'd fallen for him, for his brokenness and his strength, his bitterness and his vulnerability, for the man who was fighting his way back from the edge even when he didn't believe he could. Morning came too soon. They rose in the dark, dressed in silence, and prepared the horses by lamplight. The mountain air was sharp and clear, promising good weather. As they rode out, Sarah looked back at the cabin once. It sat quiet and dark against the forest, waiting for their return. Caleb caught her looking. "Second thoughts?" "No," she said, "just making sure it's still there, so we have something to come back to." "We will." He adjusted his grip on the reins, his jaw set with determination. "Whatever happens up there, we're coming back, together." They rode into the mountains as the sun broke over the peaks, and Sarah felt like they were riding toward something bigger than just an old trapper's cabin. They were riding toward the rest of their lives, whatever that turned out to be. The ride took longer than Caleb had planned. They'd been climbing for 3 hours when his horse stumbled on a patch of ice hidden under fresh snow. The roan recovered quickly, but Sarah saw Caleb's face go white, saw him grip the saddle horn with both hands. "You need to rest," she called out. "I'm fine." "You're gripping that saddle like it's going to fly away. Stop lying and rest." He pulled up beside a cluster of pines, dismounting with visible effort. His left leg buckled slightly when he hit the ground, and he grabbed the stirrup to keep from falling. Sarah was off Ash in seconds. "Caleb, don't!" He held up a hand. "Just give me a minute." She watched him lean against his horse, breathing hard, working the muscles in his bad leg. The pain was written all over his face, but underneath it, she saw something else. Determination. Stubborn, foolish determination. "We can turn back," she said quietly. "There's no shame in it." "Yes, there is." He looked at her, and his eyes were fierce. "I need to do this, Sarah. Need to prove I'm not completely useless out here." "You're not useless. Then let me prove it to myself." They rested for 20 minutes. Sarah made him drink water and eat some of the dried meat they'd packed. When the color started coming back to his face, they mounted up and continued. The trail grew steeper. Sarah's thighs burned from gripping the saddle, and her hands were numb despite her gloves. But every time she glanced at Caleb, she saw him sitting straighter, reading the terrain with the kind of focus she'd never seen in him before. This was his element. Even broken, even hurting, he belonged here in a way he'd never belonged in that cabin. They reached the clearing just as the sun started its descent. The ruined trapper's cabin looked exactly as Sarah remembered. Half-collapsed roof, walls leaning inward, nature slowly winning the war against human construction. But Caleb looked at it like he was seeing a palace. "We made it," he said, and there was wonder in his voice. I wasn't sure I could still do this." Sarah dismounted and stretched her aching legs. "You did more than make it. You led us here. That's not nothing." They set up camp as the temperature dropped. Caleb moved slowly but efficiently, his hands remembering tasks his body had performed 1,000 times. He cleared an area for the fire, gathered wood from the forest, built a ring of stones. Sarah watched him work and saw glimpses of the man he'd been. Capable, self-sufficient, completely at home in the wilderness. When the fire was going strong, they sat on their bedrolls and ate cold biscuits and cheese. The forest around them was silent, except for the occasional whisper of wind through the pines. "You're smiling," Sarah said. Caleb touched his face like he'd forgotten what smiling felt like. "I am, aren't I?" "What are you thinking about?" "That I forgot how good this feels. Being out here. Watching the sun go down over mountains I know like my own hands. Breathing air that's so cold it hurts. He poked at the fire with a stick. I thought the bear took this from me. Thought I'd never be able to do it again. But you are doing it. Yeah. He looked at her across the fire. Because you pushed me to try. Because you didn't let me rot in that cabin feeling sorry for myself. Sarah felt heat that had nothing to do with the fire. I didn't do anything special? You did everything. His voice was soft. You stayed when anyone else would have left. You called me on my bullshit. You made me remember there's more to life than just surviving. He paused. You made me want to live again. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Caleb stood up slowly, using his cane for balance, and moved around the fire to sit beside her. This close, she could see the firelight dancing in his eyes, could smell pine and smoke and something uniquely him. I'm not good with words, he said. Never have been. But I need you to know that this, us, it stopped being an arrangement for me a while ago. I don't know exactly when. Maybe that day in town when I kissed you, maybe before that. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being the wife my aunt bought me and started being Sarah. Just Sarah. And Sarah matters to me. Her throat was tight. Caleb, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly familiar now. I know this isn't what you signed up for. I know you married me out of desperation, not choice. But if there's any part of you that thinks maybe this could be real, Sarah kissed him. She'd meant it to be gentle, careful, but the moment their lips met, something broke open inside her. All the weeks of careful distance, of pretending her feelings were manageable, of telling herself this was still just business, it all shattered. She kissed him like she was drowning and he was air. Her hands found his face, his hair, his shoulders. He made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her with a fierceness that took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. Sarah, he whispered. Sarah, I love you. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other, but I love you anyway. I love your stubbornness and your strength and the way you're fighting so hard to come back from something that should have killed you. I love the man you are now, not the man you used to be, and I'm not going anywhere. Caleb's hands were shaking where they held her. You can't mean that. Why not? Because I'm broken. Because I'm difficult and angry, and I'll probably never be whole again, because you deserve better than a crippled mountain man who can barely walk without falling down. Stop. Sarah pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. Stop deciding what I deserve. I deserve what I choose, and I choose you, all of you. The broken parts and the strong parts and everything in between. I can't give you the life you should have. The house in town, the normal husband, I don't want normal. Normal left me starving in a falling down cabin waiting to die. This is real. And real is worth more than normal ever was. Caleb kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. When his hand slid under her coat, Sarah didn't stop him. When he laid her back on the bedroll, she pulled him down with her. They made love by firelight with the stars wheeling overhead and the mountains standing silent witness, and it was awkward and fumbling and perfect. Afterward, they lay tangled together under both their blankets, Caleb's arm heavy across her waist, his breath warm against her neck. I never thought I'd have this again, he said quietly. Someone to hold. Someone who wants to be held. Sarah laced her fingers through his. You have it now. You have me. For how long? As long as you want me. That's going to be a very long time. She smiled into the darkness. Good. They slept wrapped around each other, and when Sarah woke in the gray dawn light, Caleb was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. Morning, he said. Morning. She stretched, feeling pleasantly sore. Sleep okay? Best I've slept in 2 years. He brushed his thumb across her cheek. You're beautiful in the morning light. Sarah laughed. I'm covered in dirt and probably have leaves in my hair. Still beautiful. They made coffee and ate a cold breakfast, neither one in any hurry to break the spell of the morning. Eventually, though, reality intruded. We should head back, Caleb said reluctantly. Weather's changing. I can smell snow coming. Sarah looked at the sky.
It was still clear, but she'd learned to trust Caleb's instincts about the mountains. How long do we have? Few hours, maybe. Enough time if we leave soon. They packed up camp and started the ride back. Sarah noticed Caleb sat easier in the saddle now, like some weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He pointed out animal tracks in the snow, identified bird calls, showed her which plants the deer had been browsing. "You're in your element out here," she said. "I am now. Wasn't sure I ever would be again." He glanced back at her. "Thank you for pushing me to try." "Thank you for letting me." They were halfway home when the snow started. It began as a few lazy flakes, then picked up quickly until they were riding through a white curtain that reduced visibility to almost nothing. "Stay close," Caleb called back. "Follow my horse. Don't try to navigate on your own." Sarah kept Ash right behind the roan, trusting Caleb to find the trail. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the temperature dropped fast enough that Sarah's teeth started chattering. She lost track of time. All she knew was the gray shape of Caleb's horse ahead of her, the sting of snow against her face, the growing numbness in her hands and feet. Just when she thought she couldn't stand another minute of it, the cabin appeared through the white like a miracle. They got the horses into the barn, rubbing them down quickly before running for the house. Caleb had to lean heavily on Sarah. His bad leg had stiffened up in the cold, but they made it inside and slammed the door against the wind. The cabin was freezing. Caleb built up the fire while Sarah changed into dry clothes, her fingers so numb she could barely work the buttons. When she came out, Caleb was standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames. "That was close," he said. "Another hour and we might not have made it." "But we did make it." Sarah crossed to him and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "You got us home safe." He turned in her arms, and the expression on his face stole her breath. "I love you," he said. "I should have said it last night, but I was scared. I'm still scared. But I love you, Sarah, more than I thought I could love anything." Sarah pulled him down into a kiss that tasted like snowmelt and promises. "Say it again." "I love you." "Again." "I love you." He smiled against her mouth. "I could say it 1,000 times and it still wouldn't be enough." "Then you'd better get started." They spent the rest of the day in the cabin, wrapped around each other, talking and laughing and making plans. Caleb told her about the cabin rebuild, how he wanted to do it right, make it a real home away from home. Sarah told him about wanting to visit her family soon, wanting him to really know Thomas and her mother. "We'll go next week," Caleb promised. "Stay as long as you want. I should meet my brother-in-law properly anyway. Thomas is going to love you. Or be terrified of me." "He'll love you," Sarah insisted. "Once he sees you're good to me, he'll love you." They made the trip to the ranch the following week. Sarah's mother and Thomas were living in a cottage at the edge of the main property, a small but solid house with real windows and a functioning stove. When Sarah knocked, Thomas threw open the door and launched himself at her. "Sarah, you came!" She caught him and held on tight, breathing in the smell of his hair. He'd gained weight. His cheeks had color. He looked healthy in a way that made her want to cry. "Of course I came. I missed you." She set him down and gestured to Caleb, who hung back awkwardly. "Thomas, this is Caleb, my husband." Thomas looked up at Caleb with wide eyes. "You're really tall." "I am." Caleb crouched down to Thomas's level, wincing slightly at the movement. "Nice to meet you properly, Thomas." "Did you really kill a bear?" "Thomas!" Sarah's mother appeared in the doorway, looking healthier than Sarah had seen her in years. "Don't be rude." "It's all right," Caleb said. "Yes, I did. But the bear nearly killed me first, so I wouldn't recommend it." Thomas studied him seriously. "Are you nice to Sarah?" "I try to be." "Do you make her happy?" Caleb glanced at Sarah, and the softness in his expression made her heart squeeze. "I hope so." "He does," Sarah said quietly. "He makes me very happy." Thomas nodded, satisfied. "Okay, you can come in then." They spent 3 days at the ranch. Sarah watched Caleb interact with her family and saw sides of him she'd never seen before. He was patient with Thomas, answering endless questions about mountains and tracking and horses. He was respectful to her mother, helping her with tasks around the cottage without making her feel weak. And with Martha, who hosted them for dinner at the main house, he was different too, less defensive, almost grateful. "You look better," Martha told him over dessert. "Both of you do."
We are better, Caleb said simply. You were right. About everything. Martha's eyebrows rose. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I want to make sure I heard correctly. Caleb smiled, a real smile that transformed his whole face. Don't push your luck, Aunt Martha. Wouldn't dream of it. But her eyes were wet when she looked at them. I'm proud of you, Caleb. Of both of you. You've built something good together. Later, lying in the guest room with Sarah curled against his side, Caleb was quiet. What are you thinking? Sarah asked. That I don't deserve this. Any of it. You, your family accepting me, my aunt being proud. I spent so long being angry at the world, and now I have everything I thought I'd lost. You deserve it, Sarah said firmly. You survived. You fought your way back. That counts for something. I couldn't have done it without you. Maybe, but I couldn't have survived without you either, so I guess we're even. They returned to their cabin as winter started giving way to early spring. The snow began to melt, revealing brown earth and the first brave shoots of green. Caleb threw himself into preparing for the cabin rebuild with an energy Sarah hadn't seen before. He sketched plans, calculated lumber needs, ordered supplies from the ranch. At night, he'd spread the drawings across the table and walk Sarah through his vision, a small but solid structure with a sleeping loft, a real fireplace, windows that faced the morning sun. It'll be ours, he said. Not something we inherited or borrowed, something we built together from nothing. Sarah traced the lines on the paper. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be ours. That's all that matters. As the weather warmed, Caleb started taking Sarah on longer rides, teaching her the mountains the way he knew them. They explored trails she'd never seen, camped under the stars, made love in meadows carpeted with wildflowers. And slowly, Sarah watched Caleb shed the last of his bitterness like a snake shedding old skin. He still had bad days, days when his leg hurt so much he could barely walk, when the scars pulled tight and reminded him of what he'd lost. But those days came less frequently, and when they did, he didn't shut her out anymore. One morning in late April, Sarah woke feeling strange. Her stomach was unsettled, and the smell of coffee made her want to retch. She made it to the basin just in time to be violently sick. Caleb was beside her in seconds, holding her hair back, his hand steady on her shoulder. How long has this been happening? He asked when she finally stopped heaving. First time. Sarah rinsed her mouth, her mind racing. Caleb, I think I might be pregnant. He went very still. Are you sure? No, maybe. I don't know. She turned to look at him, trying to read his expression. Would that be, is that something you want? Caleb's hand found her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. A baby. Our baby. His voice cracked. Sarah, I never thought I'd have a family. After the attack, after everything, I thought that part of my life was over. If you're pregnant, is that a yes? That's a hell yes. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. That's the best news I've ever gotten. They rode to the ranch that afternoon. The doctor confirmed what Sarah already knew. She was about 6 weeks along, due sometime in early December. You'll need to take it easy, the doctor warned. No heavy lifting, plenty of rest, good food. Caleb looked like he was already planning to wrap her in cotton wool and never let her out of his sight. I'm pregnant, not dying, Sarah told him on the ride home. I can still ride, still help with the cabin rebuild, still live my life. You're carrying our child. You need to be careful. I will be careful, but I'm not going to spend 6 months sitting in a chair doing nothing. That's not who I am. They compromised. Sarah would help with the lighter work on the cabin, but leave the heavy lifting to Caleb and the ranch hands Martha sent up to help. She would ride, but not on difficult trails. She would live her life, but she'd be smart about it. The cabin rebuild began in May. They hauled lumber up the mountain, cleared the old ruins, and started building from the foundation up. It was hard work, made harder by Caleb's injuries, but he approached it with the same stubborn determination he'd brought to everything else. Sarah watched him frame walls, measure beams, notch logs with the kind of precision that spoke to years of experience. He moved slower than he would have before the attack, had to take more breaks, sometimes had to ask for help with tasks he would have done alone. But he was building something, creating something, and it made him come alive in ways Sarah had never seen. You're good at this, she said one afternoon, watching him work. I used to be great at it. He wiped sweat from his forehead. Now I'm just competent. But competent is enough. By late summer, the cabin had walls and a roof. By early fall, it had windows and a door. The fireplace took the longest. Caleb insisted on doing the stonework himself, fitting each rock with painstaking care. "It has to be perfect," he said when Sarah asked why he was taking so long. "This is our place, where we'll bring our children, where we'll grow old together. It has to be perfect." The cabin was finished in mid-October, just as the leaves started turning gold and red. They spent the first night there, wrapped in blankets by the fire, listening to the wind in the pines outside. "We did it," Sarah said, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "We built something real." Caleb kissed her temple. "We built a home, the first thing that's ever really been mine." "Ours," Sarah corrected. "Ours," he agreed. "Everything from now on is ours." When they returned to their main cabin a few days later, Martha was waiting on the porch. "Caleb, there's a letter for you," she said, handing him an envelope. "From back east. One of the men you guided before the attack." Caleb opened it slowly. Sarah watched his face as he read, saw shock give way to something like wonder. "What is it?" she asked. "He wants me to guide another hunting party next fall. Says he's been telling everyone back east about the mountain man who survived a grizzly attack. Says there are people who want to hunt with a legend." Caleb looked up, his eyes bright. "He's offering double what I used to charge." Sarah's heart swelled. "Are you going to do it?" "I don't know if I can. If I'm capable of—" "You are." Sarah took his hand. "You're more capable than you think. You rebuilt a cabin. You're about to be a father. You came back from the edge of death and made a life. If you can do all that, you can guide a hunting party." Caleb pulled her close, one hand splayed protectively over her belly. "We'll see. Maybe next year. After the baby comes. After I'm sure you're both safe." "We'll be safe," Sarah promised. "We're home. And home is wherever we are together." December came with the first heavy snows. Sarah went into labor on a night so cold the windows frosted over on the inside. Caleb rode through a blizzard to fetch the doctor and midwife from the ranch, then paced the cabin like a caged animal while Sarah labored in their bed. When the baby's first cry split the air, Caleb burst through the door despite the midwife's protests. Are they? "They're perfect," the midwife said, placing a tiny bundle in Sarah's arms. "You have a son." Caleb crossed to the bed on shaking legs. He looked down at the baby, red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving at the air, and tears started streaming down his face. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son." Sarah had never seen him cry before. She reached up and pulled him down beside her, and together they looked at the miracle they'd created. "What should we name him?" she asked. Caleb touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The baby grabbed it immediately, his grip surprisingly strong. "James," Caleb said, "after my father, if that's all right with you." "James Brennan." Sarah tested the name. "It's perfect." They spent the rest of the night huddled together, Caleb, Sarah, and baby James, while the storm raged outside and the fire burned low. And Sarah thought about how far they'd come from that first cold night in the cabin, two strangers bound by desperation and money. Now they were a family, not because a contract said so, but because they'd chosen each other every single day, because they'd fought their way through pain and fear and doubt to build something real. Caleb kissed her forehead. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you both more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, feeling the weight of their son in her arms, the warmth of her husband beside her. "Thank you for not giving up. On yourself. On us. Thank you for not letting me." He smiled down at James, who had finally stopped crying and was looking up at them with unfocused eyes. "Thank you for everything." Outside, the storm continued, but inside the cabin was warm and filled with love, and three people who had all been broken in different ways were finally, miraculously, whole. Spring came early the year James turned 1. Sarah stood on the porch of their cabin watching Caleb teach their son to walk. James wobbled on fat legs, his small hands gripping his father's fingers, his face scrunched in concentration. Every few steps, he'd lose his balance and plop down on his padded bottom, laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. "Come on, Jamie,"
Caleb coaxed, crouching down despite the protest from his bad leg. You can do it. Just a few more steps to Mama. James looked at Sarah, his dark eyes so much like Caleb's that it sometimes took her breath away. He let go of his father's hands and took 3 lurching steps before tumbling forward. Sarah caught him, swooping him up into her arms. You did it! You walked all by yourself! James shrieked with delight and immediately started squirming to be put down so he could do it again. He's stubborn, Caleb said, standing up slowly and crossing to where Sarah stood. Wonder where he gets that. Definitely from you. Pretty sure you're the stubborn one in this family. Sarah kissed him, quick and easy, the kind of casual affection that had become second nature over the past 2 years. We're both stubborn. Poor Jamie doesn't stand a chance. They watched their son practice walking for another hour until he wore himself out and fell asleep in Sarah's arms. She carried him inside and laid him in the cradle Caleb had built, running her hand over the smooth wood. Everything in this cabin had been made by Caleb's hands or hers. The furniture, the curtains, the quilts on the bed. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs in a way nothing else had ever been. Letter came from the ranch while you were outside, Caleb said, holding up an envelope. From that hunting party organizer back east. He's confirming for September. Wants to know if I'm still willing to guide. Sarah turned to look at him. They'd been dancing around this decision for months. The money would be significant, enough to expand their herd, maybe build onto the cabin, but it meant Caleb would be gone for 3 weeks, and she could see the war in his eyes every time he thought about it. What do you want to do? She asked. I don't know. He tossed the letter onto the table. Part of me wants to prove I can still do it, that I'm not just the cripple who got lucky and survived, but leaving you and Jamie for 3 weeks. We'll be fine. Your aunt will check on us. Thomas is old enough now to help if we need anything. Sarah crossed to him and took his hands. The question isn't whether we'll manage. It's whether you're ready to go back out there, to be that person again. Caleb was quiet for a long time. What if I fail? What if I get out there and can't keep up, can't track worth a damn, can't do any of the things I used to do? Then you come home and we figure out what's next. Sarah squeezed his fingers. But you won't fail, Caleb. I've watched you rebuild that old trapper's cabin. I've seen you track deer through snow I couldn't even see prints in. You're not the same man you were before the bear, but you're still one hell of a mountain man. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. How do you always know exactly what to say? I don't. Half the time I'm making it up as I go. She pulled back to look at him. But I believe in you. That part's not made up. Caleb wrote back, accepting the job. The next 4 months, Sarah watched him prepare with the kind of focused intensity she remembered from the cabin rebuild. He went on long rides to build his stamina, practiced tracking, shooting, reading weather signs. Some days he came back limping so badly he could barely climb the porch steps, but he never complained. You're pushing yourself too hard, Sarah said one evening after he'd spent 12 hours in the mountains and come back gray with exhaustion. I need to be ready. You need to not kill yourself before you even get there. She made him sit while she pulled off his boots. What good is proving you can do this if you're too broken to actually do it? I'm already broken, Sarah. This is just the daily reminder. She looked up sharply. Don't do that. Don't slide back into feeling sorry for yourself. You've come too far. Caleb's jaw tightened. I'm not feeling sorry for myself. I'm being realistic. My leg is never going to work right. My shoulder will always hurt. I'm never going to be what I was. Good. Sarah yanked off the second boot harder than necessary. Because what you were was a lonely man living in the mountains with nothing but his pride. What you are now is a husband and father who's fought like hell to build a life. I'll take what you are now over what you were any day. The anger drained out of Caleb's face. He reached down and pulled Sarah up onto his lap, ignoring the twinge in his bad leg. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. He kissed her, slow and deep, and Sarah felt the familiar heat build between them. James was asleep in his cradle. The night was theirs. Later, lying tangled in the sheets with Caleb's hand tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, Sarah asked the question that had been nagging at her. Are you scared? About the hunting trip? Terrified. His honesty didn't surprise her anymore. What if I've built this up in my head and I can't actually do it? What if the clients complain, want their money back, tell everyone the legendary Caleb Brennan is washed up? Then you'll deal with it. We'll deal with it. Sarah rolled over to face him. But you're borrowing trouble from tomorrow. You don't know how it'll go until you try. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of watching you torture yourself with what-ifs. She poked his chest. You survived a grizzly bear ripping you apart. You rebuilt your life from nothing. You learned how to love again when you thought that part of you was dead. A hunting trip should be easy compared to all that. Caleb caught her hand and pressed it over his heart. Nothing about any of this has been easy, but it's been worth it. Every hard moment, every failure, every time I wanted to give up, it was all worth it to end up here with you. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I love you. I love you too. More than I have words for. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Sarah dreamed of mountains and storms and coming home. The hunting party arrived in early September. 6 men from Philadelphia, all money and expensive gear, led by the same organizer who'd written to Caleb. They looked at Caleb's cane with poorly hidden skepticism. You're sure you can handle the high country? The organizer asked. No offense, but you're not exactly... I can handle it. Caleb's voice had the same steel Sarah recognized from when someone questioned his abilities. Question is whether your clients can keep up. The men exchanged glances. One of them, a banker named Morrison, stepped forward. We heard stories about you back east. The mountain man who killed a grizzly with a knife. The tracker who could find anything. We came out here specifically to hunt with you. But if you're not up to it, I'm up to it. Caleb straightened, and despite the cane, despite the limp, he looked every inch the legend they'd come looking for. Pack light. We leave at dawn. And when we're in my mountains, you follow my rules. Do that, and I'll get you your trophies and bring you home alive. Sarah watched from the porch of the main ranch house. James balanced on her hip. Martha stood beside her. He looks good, Martha said quietly. Confident. He's scared to death. Then he's hiding it well. Martha glanced at Sarah. You did this. You know that, right? You brought him back. He brought himself back. I just gave him a reason to try. Martha smiled. That's all anyone needs sometimes, a reason to try. The hunting party disappeared into the mountains at dawn. Sarah returned to the cabin with James and tried not to count the days. A week passed. Then 2. Sarah kept herself busy with chores, with James, with visiting her mother and Thomas. But at night, lying alone in the bed she shared with Caleb, she stared at the ceiling and worried. What if something happened? What if his leg gave out on a mountain trail? What if they ran into another bear? What if he never came home? She was feeding James breakfast on the morning of the 17th day when she heard horses. Sarah ran to the window. Through the trees she could see riders approaching, 7 of them, leading pack horses loaded with gear and what looked like trophies. She was out the door before she could think. James clutched against her chest. The riders emerged into the clearing, and Sarah's knees nearly gave out with relief. Caleb rode at the front, sitting tall in the saddle, his face tanned and his eyes bright. He looked tired but alive, more alive than she'd seen him in months. He dismounted and crossed to her in 3 long strides, pulling both her and James into his arms. You're back, Sarah said into his shoulder. You're actually back. Told you I would be. His voice was rough. Missed you. Missed both of you so damn much. The hunting clients were talking excitedly, showing off elk racks and deer pelts. The organizer counted out Caleb's payment, a stack of bills that made Sarah's eyes widen. Best guide we've ever had, Morrison said, shaking Caleb's hand. Made good on every promise? Already telling everyone back east they need to book with you. After they left, Sarah and Caleb sat on the porch steps while James played in the dirt nearby. Tell me everything, Sarah said. Got them all trophies. 2 elk, 3 deer, a mountain goat Morrison wanted for his study. No injuries, no close calls. Tracked an elk for 2 days through terrain that would have lost a lesser tracker. Caleb's voice held quiet pride. My leg hurt like hell most of the time, but I managed. Didn't slow us down much. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me too. He laughed. Is that allowed? To be proud of yourself? It's required. Sarah leaned against his shoulder. You proved you could still do it. You can put that fear to rest now. Got 3 more requests for next season. Word spreading that the legendary mountain man is guiding again. He paused. But I'm thinking I might be selective. Maybe only take 2 trips a year. Spend the rest of my time here with you and Jamie. Sarah's heart swelled. You don't have to do that. If you want to guide more, I don't. I love the mountains, love the work, but I love this more. Being home, being a father, being your husband. He turned to look at her. I spent too many years alone up here. I'm not wasting the time I have now. They watched James attempt to catch a butterfly, his little legs pumping as he chased it around the yard. He fell twice but got up laughing each time. He's fearless, Caleb said, like his mother. He's stubborn like his father. Poor kid doesn't stand a chance. Over the next 2 years, Caleb guided 4 more hunting trips. Each time, he came home with more money and more confidence. The legend of the mountain man who'd survived a grizzly and come back stronger spread across the territory. People wrote from as far as New York and Boston asking to book trips. But Caleb was selective. He never took more than 2 trips a year, never stayed gone longer than 3 weeks. The rest of his time was spent at home, helping Sarah expand their garden, teaching James to ride, working on improvements to both cabins. Thomas, now 13, started spending summers with them. Caleb taught him to track and shoot, treated him like the younger brother he'd never had. Sarah's mother visited often, her health fully restored, her eyes bright with the joy of watching her daughter's happiness. Martha aged gracefully, running the ranch with the same iron will she'd always had. She doted on James, her only great-nephew, and never let Caleb forget that she'd been right about Sarah all along. I told you she was perfect for you, Martha said one Christmas dinner, watching Sarah and Caleb dance while James clapped along. You told me she was desperate enough to say yes, Caleb corrected. There's a difference. The outcome is the same. You're happy. I'm happy, Caleb agreed. Happier than I ever thought I deserved to be. When James was 4, Sarah told Caleb she was pregnant again. They had another son, Daniel, with Sarah's light hair and Caleb's stubborn chin. Then, 2 years later, a daughter they named Margaret after Sarah's mother. The cabin grew crowded with children and laughter and noise. They added 2 more rooms, built a bigger table, expanded the barn to hold more horses. What had started as a lonely mountain hideaway became a home bursting with life. Caleb's leg never fully healed. Some days he could barely walk, had to use the cane just to get around the cabin. His shoulder ached in cold weather, and the scars on his side pulled tight when he moved wrong. But he learned to work around the pain, to accept his limitations without letting them define him. Does it still bother you? Sarah asked one night, tracing the scars across his ribs. That you can't do everything you used to? Sometimes. But then I look at what I have now, you, the kids, this life we've built, and I realize I wouldn't trade it. Not for perfect legs or a pain-free body or anything else. He caught her hand and kissed her palm. The bear took something from me, but it gave me something too. Gave me you. Gave me this family. That's a trade I'd make every time. The years rolled past. James grew tall and strong, with his father's love of the mountains and his mother's fierce heart. He learned to track and ride almost as well as Caleb, spent his summers working on the ranch and his winters helping with the guiding business. Daniel was quieter, more thoughtful, preferring books to hunting but still capable in the wilderness. Margaret was pure fire, riding before she could walk properly, following her father and brothers into the mountains whenever they'd let her. Sarah watched her children grow and marveled at the impossible path that had led her here. From the freezing cabin, where she'd signed away her future, to this warm, loud, chaotic home filled with love, it seemed like something from a dream. On a cool October evening when James was 16, the whole family gathered at the trapper's cabin for a weekend. They'd spent the day hiking, and now everyone sat around the fire roasting meat and telling stories. "Tell us about the bear," James said. He'd heard the story 100 times, but never tired of it. Caleb glanced at Sarah. She nodded. It was important for the children to know where they'd come from, what their father had survived. So Caleb told the story again. The hunting party, the foolish client, the moment the grizzly charged. He didn't spare the brutal details, didn't minimize the horror of what had happened. But he also talked about what came after, the long recovery, the bitterness and anger, the isolation. "I thought my life was over," he said. "Thought I'd never be worth anything again. I was ready to just fade away up here and let the mountains claim me." "What changed?" Margaret asked. She was 8 and thought her father could do anything.
Caleb looked at Sarah across the fire. Your mother changed everything. She showed up at my door as part of a business deal, neither of us wanting to be there, both of us just trying to survive. And somehow, she made me want to live again. Made me remember there was more to life than just existing. But Mama was poor, Daniel said. She didn't have anything.
She had everything that mattered: courage, strength, the refusal to give up even when things looked impossible. Caleb's voice was soft. She saved my life. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. And that choice changed everything. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. After all these years, he could still make her cry with words. Later, after the children were asleep in the loft, Sarah and Caleb sat outside watching the stars wheel overhead. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never having this?" Sarah asked. "If Martha hadn't come to my cabin that night, if I'd said no, if you'd refused, I think about it sometimes. How many small choices had to line up perfectly to get us here?" Caleb pulled her closer. "But I try not to dwell on the what-ifs. We're here now. That's what matters. I was so angry when she first made the offer. Felt like I was being bought and sold like livestock, like I was giving up any chance at real love or happiness. And now? Now I know that sometimes the things we think are traps are actually doorways. Sometimes desperation forces us towards something better than we ever could have found on our own." Sarah turned to look at him. "I was desperate when I married you, but I chose to stay, chose to fight for this, and that choice gave me everything I ever wanted." Caleb kissed her forehead. "We both made choices. Every single day we chose each other. That's what made this real." They sat in comfortable silence, 20 years of marriage and partnership between them, and Sarah thought about the girl she'd been. Scared, desperate, selling herself for medicine and safety. That girl would barely recognize the woman she'd become: wife, mother, partner to a man who'd been just as broken and lost as she was. "You know what I think?" Sarah said suddenly. "What?" "I think everyone's carrying scars from something. Poverty, loss, injury, heartbreak. Everyone's damaged in some way. The difference is whether you let those scars define you or whether you build something in spite of them." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "That's what we did, isn't it? Built something in spite of everything that tried to break us." "We built something because of it," Sarah corrected. "Our scars made us who we are, made us understand each other, made us fight harder for this than we ever would have if life had been easy." "You really have gotten wise over the years." Sarah laughed. "I'm still making most of it up as I go. But I've learned a few things. Like, love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours. Someone willing to do the hard work of building a life together. We've done a lot of hard work. We have, and it was worth every second." The next morning, they rode back to their main cabin as a family. Sarah watched Caleb lead the way, James riding beside him, the younger children following behind. Her husband still limped, still needed the cane on bad days, still carried the scars from the bear and the years of bitterness that had followed. But he also carried the weight of being a father, a husband, a guide who'd reclaimed his reputation and his life. He'd become more than he'd been before the attack, not in spite of what he'd lost, but because of how he'd fought to rebuild. That evening, after the children were in bed, Caleb pulled out the old contract Martha had drawn up 20 years ago. They kept it in a wooden box along with other important papers. "Look at this," he said, smoothing the yellowed paper. "We fulfilled every term. 5 years became 10, became 20. The cottage went to your mother. The monthly allowance stopped years ago because we didn't need it anymore." Sarah read over his shoulder, seeing her signature at the bottom. Young, scared, desperate. "Should we burn it? It's not like we need it anymore." "No." Caleb folded it carefully and put it back in the box. "I want to keep it. Want to remember where we started. Want our kids to see it someday and understand that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unlikely beginnings." Sarah leaned against him. "We were so young, so broken." "We still are in different ways, but we're broken together now. That makes all the difference." Years continued to pass. The children grew up and started lives of their own. James took over most of the guiding business, building on his father's reputation. Daniel became a teacher in town, married a quiet girl, and gave them grandchildren. Margaret shocked everyone by becoming a ranch foreman at 18, proving she could handle cattle and men twice her size. Sarah's mother passed peacefully in her sleep at 70, surrounded by children and grandchildren she'd never thought she'd live to see. Thomas grew into a solid, reliable man who managed the ranch alongside Martha, eventually taking it over when she decided to retire. Martha lived to 92, sharp and demanding until the very end. When she died, she left the ranch to Thomas and a substantial sum to Caleb and Sarah with a note that said simply, "For proving an old woman right." Caleb's guiding days ended when he turned 55, and his leg finally gave him too much trouble to handle the mountains safely. But by then, James had taken over completely, and Caleb was content to spend his days at home, teaching his grandchildren to track and ride, working in the garden with Sarah. On a spring morning, 30 years after that first desperate winter, Sarah and Caleb rode up to the ridge where he'd first brought her all those years ago. They were both gray now, both moving slower, both carrying the accumulated weight of 3 decades. They stood at the overlook, looking down at the valley that had witnessed their entire lives together. The ranch sprawled below, bigger now. Their cabin was a small, dark shape in the forest. The trapper's cabin they'd rebuilt sat in its clearing, still used for weekend getaways. "We did okay, didn't we?" Caleb said quietly. Sarah took his hand. His fingers were gnarled now, scarred from years of work, but still strong. "We did better than okay. We did impossible. People thought we'd never last. Poor desperate girl and bitter cripple, married for money and medicine. They gave us 6 months. People were wrong." Sarah leaned against him, fitting into his side the way she'd done 1,000 times before. "We lasted because we chose to. Every single day, we made the choice to stay, to fight, to build something real." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I was dying before you came. Not physically, but inside. The bear didn't kill me, but I was killing myself anyway, just slower. And then you walked into that cabin, stubborn and scared and refusing to let me wallow in self-pity, and you made me want to live again. You did the same for me. I was surviving, but I wasn't living, just going through the motions, waiting for something to change. You gave me a reason to hope again." They stood in silence, watching clouds cast shadows across the valley below. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. "Do you have any regrets?" Sarah asked. Caleb considered the question seriously. "I regret that I wasted time being bitter. Regret that I pushed you away at first when you were trying to help. Regret the years I spent alone before you when I could have been living." He squeezed her hand. "But I don't regret a single day since I finally opened my eyes and saw what was right in front of me. Don't regret the hard times or the struggles or any of it. It all brought us here." "Same," Sarah said. "I regret my father leaving. Regret the poverty and the fear and watching my mother almost die. But I don't regret accepting Martha's offer. Don't regret marrying you. Don't regret any choice I made that led me to this life." They turned away from the view and headed back to their horses. Caleb moved carefully, using his cane, his left leg dragging slightly. Sarah walked beside him, her own joints protesting after decades of hard work. They were old now, scarred and worn and far from perfect. But they were together, and that made everything else irrelevant. On the ride home, Caleb spoke again. "You know what I think the real miracle was?" "What?" "That we both had the courage to try. You had the courage to accept a crazy offer from a stranger and marry a broken man you'd never met. I had the courage to let you in when every instinct told me to push you away. Without that courage, both of us finding it at the same time, none of this would exist." Sarah thought about that. About the courage it had taken to sign that contract. About the courage it had taken Caleb to accept his aunt's interference. About all the tiny acts of courage that had followed, choosing honesty over comfort, vulnerability over safety, hope over despair. "Maybe that's what love really is," she said. "Not finding someone perfect, but finding someone worth being brave for." "I like that." Caleb smiled at her. "You worth being brave for, Sarah Brennan. Worth every risk, every hard moment, every time I had to choose courage over fear." "You too. You're worth all of it." They reached the cabin as the sun started to set, painting the sky gold and pink. Smoke rose from the chimney. One of the grandchildren must have started a fire. Horses nickered in the barn. The garden was starting to green up with early spring growth. Everything was exactly as it should be. That night, lying in bed with Caleb's arm around her, Sarah thought about the impossible journey that had brought them here. From that freezing cabin and that desperate choice to this warm bed and this full life. From strangers bound by contract to partners bound by love. From two broken people just trying to survive to a family that had thrived against all odds. "Caleb," she whispered.
Hmm?
"Thank you." "For what?" "For choosing me. For building this with me. For loving me even when I was difficult and stubborn and pushing you to be better than you thought you could be." He pulled her closer. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for staying when you could have left, for making me believe I deserved a second chance." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, the way they'd done for 30 years, and Sarah's last thought before sleep claimed her was that this ordinary evening in this ordinary cabin with this extraordinary man was the real miracle. Not the survival, though that mattered. Not the money or the success or the family, though those were blessings. The real miracle was that two people who'd had every reason to give up had instead chosen to fight, had chosen each other, had chosen hope over despair and love over loneliness. And in that choice, they'd built something stronger than any legend, more lasting than any story. They'd built a life. Together. And that, Sarah thought as sleep pulled her under, was the greatest victory of all. The end came peacefully for both of them, the way they'd lived their later years, together, surrounded by family, having given the world more than they'd taken from it. When people spoke of them afterward, they didn't talk about the poor girl who'd married for money or the crippled mountain man who'd lost everything. They talked about this couple who'd proven that broken things could be mended, that desperate beginnings could lead to beautiful endings, that love, real love, the kind built on choice and courage and daily acts of showing up, could transform everything. They talked about the impossible life that nobody expected but everyone witnessed. The legend that became real not because it was easy, but because two people decided it was worth fighting for. And in the mountains of Montana, where winter still came fierce and spring still melted the snow, where the peaks still stood silent witness to human struggle and triumph, the story lived on, not as tragedy or cautionary tale, but as proof. Proof that second chances exist, that broken people can heal, that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are doorways to the best ones. That courage and stubbornness and refusing to quit can build something that lasts. The cabins still stood, both of them, monuments to what two people could create from nothing. The mountain trails still whispered stories of the tracker who came back from the dead and the woman who brought him home. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren still gathered to hear the tale of how it all began. And every time they told it, they remembered the truth underneath the legend. That love isn't about finding perfection. It's about finding someone whose scars match yours, whose strength covers your weakness,